Scrooge, an Introduction, 2009. Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843. He was already very famous, having made his name with the Pickwick Papers and then enhanced it with Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Barnaby Rudge. And all this before he was 30. This pace was prodigious. No writer alive has written at such a pace and produced such high quality work at such a young age. Dickens is said to have written A Christmas Carol in 6 weeks to pay off a debt. Perhaps that was why grasping money lenders were much on his mind, and he presented this novella as a light-hearted jeu de spirit, a Christmas fairy tale or a ghost tale intended to entertain and put his readers in good humor. The story has a traditional three-part structure of a fairy tale. Three spirits of Christmas, three ages of Scrooge, past, present, and future. It also has a fairy tale ending in which light triumphs over darkness, goodness and harmony reign, and an innocent life in peril, Tiny Tim's, is saved, not to mention the gnarly old soul of Scrooge. Dickens' more covert intention, signaled by the work's one time working title, The Sledgehammer, was to strike a few more blows for the social justice who he was so keen on by contrasting avarice and poverty, then proposing his usual antidote, an outflowing of private benevolence. For, as George Orwell has commented, though Dickens burned out with anger at social injustices, he never went so far as to urge the whole scale political revolution. But none of this would account for the overwhelming longevity and popularity of Carol's protagonist, Ebenezer Scrooge. Scrooge is one of those characters like Hamlet who has become detached from the story in which he has his birth and has become instantly recognizable even by those who may have never read the book. Why should that be? Let me consult my own model, that favorite Dickensian repository of infallible knowledge, the human heart. When did I first meet the immortal Scrooge, and why did I become so fond of him? I seem always to be aware of him. Did I hear A Christmas Carol read on the radio during my 1940s childhood? It's likely. Those were radio days. Or did I encounter him the way I encountered so much else, peering out with sly and narrow but nonetheless twinkling eyes from the colorful ads in the magazines? In this respect, Scrooge was sort of anti Santa Claus, Santa Claus's dark twin. The one fat and jolly and round and red, dispensing largesse, on the other hand, skinny and pinched and dull, withholding it. Yet at the end of the carol, the new, redeemed, turkey purchasing Bob Cratchit, salary raising Scrooge has become sort of Santa, which raises the chilling responsibility that Santa might one day shrivel and wizen and morph into Scrooge at his worst, that crabby geezer in the opening chapter of the book. Consider those punitive, sentient lumps of coal, not much mentioned these days, but kept, you can bet, in Santa's worst case reserve arsenal of dirty tricks. Coal in your stocking would just be what the mean version of Scrooge would have liked. Whatever the case, by the time my 7-year-old self discovered Disney's Scrooge McDuck, I knew quite well what the name Scrooge was supposed to signify. It included the fact that within McDuck's ancient, scheming husk there flickered a kindly and generous impulse. It was a good sign that duck triplets adored their Uncle Scrooge. He was a lot of fun because in recreational moments he often behaved just as childishly as they did themselves. This is one key to original Ebenezer Scrooge. He's a child at heart. But when we first meet him in A Christmas Carol, he's wounded child, albeit an elderly one. In writing Scrooge, Dickens delved deep within and put a good measure of his own hidden pain into his creation. He had never forgotten the most hopeless periods of his life when his feckless father had been locked into debtor's prison and young Charles had been wenched from school and set to work in the blacking factory to help support the destitute Dickens family. This period did not last forever, but for a child, the present moment is forever. The young Dickens could see no possibility of rescue from the unfamiliar hell into which his father's financial mishaps had thrust him. The most poignant moment in A Christmas Carol is not the death of Tiny Tim, weep making though that is, nor it is the pageant's picture of Scrooge's own possible future corpse, plundered and bereft, unwashed and unwept, uncared for. The objective mind might comment that it doesn't much matter to a corpse what sort of outfit it's wearing or who is standing around it, though it mattered a lot to Dickens. No, the most sniffle making scene is the first picture of Spirit of Christmas Past shows to Scrooge. His young boy self, a solitary child abandoned by his friends at a cheerless, run down boarding school, while everyone else has gone home for Christmas. Luckily, this child Scrooge does not have some friends, but they are imaginary ones. They exist only in books. However, by the next picture, several years later, even these friends have gone, and a despair has taken their place. To be alone, to be a helpless child, neglected and forgotten in a dreary place such as Dickensian nightmare, acted out by Scrooge. It's this, not the arrival of Scrooge's sister Fan to take him home from school, nor the happy dancing and capering that goes on during Scrooge's apprentice years at Mr. Fezziwig's, that sets the miserly part of Scrooge on the road it has followed into old age. Scrooge's famous cry of "Bah, humbug!" means I won't even admit the possibility of human sharing in happiness because they were denied to me in the most important period of my life. The idea that Christmas open hearted and brotherly love are frauds had ample proofs in the childhood of Scrooge, and even to some extent in that of Dickens. For sordid school, read Blacking Factory. For uncaring father neglecting his son, read Imprisoned Father whose lack of money caused his son's ordeal. Scrooge's heart withered on the vine because Dickens almost dead. Due to the Blacking Factory episode, Dickens seemed to have been torn throughout his life between two impulses: the fear of going bankrupt, which drove him to work himself into a frenzy in order to make more money, and the desire to exercise himself the generosity that would have saved his child self from Blacking Factory had anyone turned up with some of it then. In many of his fictions, Dickens is fond of arranging characters in pairs. The lookalikes Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton of A Tale of Two Cities are the most obvious examples. The virtuous idealist versus the cynic in Wastrel. We find such arrangements melodramatic. Heroes and villains no longer convince us. However, in Ebenezer Scrooge, Dickens melts the two opposites into one. Being neither hero nor villain, Scrooge is both, and also an individual whose conflicts we can understand. Perhaps this is a clue to Scrooge's long life and to the popularity he still enjoys. With Scrooge, we don't have to choose. Not only that, the two halves of Scrooge correspond to our own two money related impulses: rake in the cash and keep it all for yourself or share with others. With Scrooge, we can vicariously do both. There's yet another of those young Dickens hapless child avatars in A Christmas Carol, Tiny Tim. Some people find Wee Tim too cloying to take straight. He's so infernally good. But when the Victorians said he's too good for this world, which they often did, the kind of goodness they intended was a passivity due to illness, such children usually died early. Having already written the death of little Nell in the old curiosity shop to international mass wailing, and according to Dickens, with the tears coursing down his cheeks as he polished her off, Dickens was well up to the pathos he needed for the shorter and more indirect dispatch of Tim. But Tim is a boy who can be rescued, as Scrooge was not, or not until it was rather too late, and Scrooge himself can do the rescuing. He can't perform for Tim the act of generosity which would have saved his child self. He can become a second father, the benevolent, competent, and financially sound father figure Dickens himself never had, and that he so frequently invented. At the end of A Christmas Carol, when all three spirits have come and gone, and Scrooge has had a good repentant cry, always a positive sign in Dickensian world, and the Christmas morning has dawned, and all the bells are ringing, and Scrooge has discovered he isn't dead after all, he declares that he is not only happy as an angel, he's also merry as a schoolboy. Now, which schoolboy might that be? Certainly not the one Scrooge himself was, left alone and abandoned and despairingly in the chilly, dank school of his youth. Rather, the merry schoolboy he ought to have been, and that he now, be vicariously true, Tim. Our age is the one that avoids mention of the salvation of souls, preferring to speak instead of delayed mastery in the healing process, and perhaps this is how we can best make sense of Scrooge. But whatever the terms of our interpretations, Scrooge has passed only the real test for the literary character. He remains fresh and vital. Scrooge lives. We might write on our t shirts. Yes, he does, and we rejoice with him.